Good evening, and tonight marks a defining moment for the Middle East. The guns in Gaza have fallen silent. After 2 years of war, an agreement brokered through tireless diplomacy led by the United States and Egypt has opened the door to a ceasefire and hostage release deal that many hope will lead to a lasting peace. But peace, as history reminds us, is fragile. Even as Gazans return home through the rubble of Salah ad-Din Road, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu warns that war could resume. While President Donald Trump celebrates his historic success, so is this the dawn of peace, or just a pause before the next storm?
الآن في شرم الشيخ بتجرى مفاوضات لإنهاء الحرب.
I may go there sometime toward the end of the week, maybe on Sunday.
لازم أسجل بتقدير واحترام شديد للرئيس الأمريكي ترامب على إرادته الحقيقية في إنهاء الحرب خلال جولة المفاوضات الحالية.
The Center for American Progress describes this new ceasefire as hopeful but not assured. According to the article, Israel and Hamas have both conditionally accepted President Donald Trump's plan for a phased ceasefire in Gaza. Under the agreement, Israel will withdraw to an initial line, retaining control of about 53% of Gaza, while all Israeli hostages are exchanged for Palestinian detainees. Humanitarian aid will surge, with the US and Egypt coordinating relief. The breakthrough, analysts note, came after months of mounting pressure, including frustration within Washington's over Israel's escalating actions and Egypt's persistent mediation to stop displacement and restore calm. Still, the report warns the deal's survival depends on disciplined implementation. Hamas fears Israel may not honor the later phases once hostages are released, while Netanyahu faces resistance from far-right coalition partners opposed to any withdrawal or Palestinian governance. For now, Gaza's ceasefire marks a turning point, but the article cautions that peace is not assured, only possible, and Egypt's steady diplomacy may prove decisive in making it real. To help us understand the diplomatic and regional dimensions to this deal, we're joined by Ambassador Hisham Yusuf, a senior advisor at the European Institute of Peace and a veteran of Arab diplomacy. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Ambassador.
My pleasure.
Sir, firstly, let's start off by asking, now this ceasefire has been described as a historic yet uncertain move. Do you believe it represents the beginning of genuine peace, or simply just a tactical pause in a long conflict when it comes to the Israelis?
I'm inclined to think that it is tactical, and although I hope that it leads to significant progress in relation to achieving peace, but I have my doubts because of the current Israeli coalition.
Well, could you explain to us why you're more inclined to the idea that it may be a tactical move?
Well, what I see is that Israel is bent on continuing wars, wherever it is, because this is in favor of Netanyahu because of his court cases and because he is associated with the most extreme government that Israel has seen since its establishment as a state for the last 70 plus years. So we have doubts that this would result in a situation whereby Israel would be willing to make the necessary concessions in order to achieve this objective, meaning establishment of a Palestinian state. And then also, Israel has proven in the last 2 years that it is not interested in adhering to its commitments. So the commitments that it has done in the first ceasefire were not implemented, including providing humanitarian assistance, including providing home shelters, and so on. So there wasn't a commitment by Israel to abide by its obligations that came out of the first ceasefire, and also it resumed the war without justification. So all the indications and signals that I have are signals indicating that Israel is not interested in advancing the prospects of peace, but is interested only in releasing its hostages.
Okay, we'll discuss that a little further, but let's talk about the American progress analysis that attributed the breakthrough in this current deal largely to the Egyptian persistence, as well as Trump's personal involvement. How do you interpret the Egyptians balancing the role between, moderating with Washington, Israel, and the Palestinian factions as well?
Well, Egypt has been doing that for many years in relation to a number of wars, but this war was different as a result of what happened on the 7th of October. But Egypt has been consistent, whether it's the war in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, 2021, and so on. So Egypt has always been trying to achieve some calm in relation to the situation in Gaza. This time it was much more difficult, and it took a number of countries, including Egypt, Turkey, Qatar, and other Islamic countries, and then to put pressure to bear on the US administration and on Israel in order for a ceasefire to be achieved. And we are still a very long way from advancing all kinds of demands that are needed in relation to the stabilization of the situation. Israel has not agreed to withdraw except under very difficult conditions, and it will keep arguing that these conditions are not fulfilled in order not to withdraw from Gaza as a whole. And at the end of the day, they also demanded a security parameter around Gaza and so on. So they will be procrastinating. They will be putting all kinds of obstacles in relation to all kinds of steps that are needed in the coming weeks and months in order to address the additional issues that need to be addressed at this point in time.
I mean, Mr. Ambassador, we're also seeing a shift when it comes to the American policies. From the beginning, when Trump took office, it was very clear that he was very pro-Israel and pro a lot of things, including the displacement or the forcible displacement of the Palestinians. But that's changed recently. In fact, we're starting to see a softening when it comes towards the Palestinians and a will to actually end the war. Do you think this is also related to the Egyptian diplomacy? And do you think this is going to be beneficial for the future negotiations?
Well, as a matter of fact, President Trump himself said that there is a lot of pressure on the United States by its partners all over the world as a result of the Israeli practices. And he indicated publicly that he thinks that the standing of Israel in the world has been suffering as a result of these practices. And he told them also that the support that they have in Congress has been diminishing and so on. So there was pressure on the U.S. from all kinds of quarters, including, of course, Egypt, Qatar, and others. But then it also evaluated the situation and saw what is happening around the world and pressure on European countries to take all kinds of measures against Israel. So the whole international environment was conducive to put pressure in order for this to be achieved. But in relation to having a softened position by the U.S., I'm not sure that this is true. Until a few days ago, children were still starving in Gaza. Did the U.S. put pressure to bear on Israel to allow humanitarian assistance even in the last few weeks when negotiations were ongoing? The answer is no. So I hope that as a result of this ceasefire, we will see Israel allowing humanitarian assistance in accordance to the agreement, because they didn't do that in the first time around. So we will see how the implementation will be undertaken by Israel in relation to the obligations of this current ceasefire.
Well, as you said there, Mr. Ambassador, as well earlier, that Israel is dragging its feet in every way possible and making things very difficult in a way by which they're trying to hinder the phases of this negotiation and in any attempt to end possibility of a ceasefire. Now, Israel controls about half of Gaza right now. Some argue this is not a full ceasefire, but just a managed transition. How does this partial withdrawal affect the political and the humanitarian realities on the ground, as well as the negotiation process?
Well, there are those who believe that as time passes by, this will make it difficult for Israel to resume the war. We will see whether this will materialize or this view would persist or not, because I'm not sure that it will. Does this mean that war will return at the same level? I don't think so, because also the war reached an extent that was extremely unforgiving, and with the number of casualties that we have seen and so on. So is there a provision in the ceasefire to prevent Israel from having freedom of action in Gaza? The answer is no. So, we have seen what is happening in Lebanon, for example. Israel continues to have attacks every other day in relation to the situation in Lebanon.
But at this point in time, they control a little over 50% of Gaza. Is this going to be the situation going forward, or are there expectations, at least from the Palestinian side, that they will regain full control of the Gaza Strip?
Well, according to the ceasefire or to the Trump plan, this is supposed to take place when stabilization forces enter into Gaza and take over from the Israeli forces. So this would be gradual. There are 3 phases for withdrawal, but then at the end of the day, they remain in a security parameter for a longer period of time. And at the end of the day, they can always claim that the conditions for withdrawal have not been met. Okay, will the U.S. put pressure to bear on Israel to say, no, the conditions were met, you have to withdraw further, or to have to leave Gaza as a whole? The first ceasefire included references to full withdrawal from Gaza. This time around, it is made much more difficult for Israel to fully withdraw from Gaza. So yes, now they control a little over 50% of Gaza. This is supposed to be reduced once there is a stabilization force. But then even the stabilization force, what would be the mandate of the stabilization force? It will take a long time for this to be agreed on, especially that countries will not be sending troops except when they are rather confident that these troops are not in danger. So there is a possibility that as a result of Israel always wanting to maintain freedom of action, that they would attack some of these forces, or some of them may suffer injuries or losses and so on. And I think every single country around the world doesn't want to see this happening. So we will see how things develop. There are variables that are countless in relation to all kinds of demands and requests and the next steps and so on. So the questions will continue to be open in relation to the force, in relation to early recovery, in relation to the prospect of reconstruction, in relation to withdrawal, and so on. So let alone the question of advancing the prospects of peace that were quite weak in the Trump plan.
Well, also the report had noted that Hamas accepted the plan under heavy international pressure. Given what the one has leaked, basically, how sustainable is an agreement reached under these conditions of pressure? I'm assuming the pressure is not just on Hamas, obviously, as well, on the Israelis.
Sure, but the pressure on Hamas is much bigger than the pressure on Israel. And then you have around 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who have nowhere to go. There is no water, there is no food, there are no hospitals, no schools, nothing. So this would be a very tough couple of years, as a matter of fact, for Palestinians in Gaza, and it will require a lot of work. Will Israel help in relieving this situation by allowing reconstruction material, by allowing all kinds of needs for Palestinians in Gaza? I have my doubts, because throughout the years they have been making all kinds of obstacles, including the humanitarian assistance in the last few years. They were refusing all kinds of trucks because of one item, or because of any excuse that they can find in order for this these trucks do not enter Gaza. And this has continued. They have also facilitated for some gangs in Gaza to rob the humanitarian assistance. So the Israeli practices continue to be detrimental to the kind of stability that is required, especially after the suffering that the Palestinians have gone through in the last 2 years. And we should not also forget that the situation in the West Bank is equally bad. But also the international community has not dealt with this situation with the level of seriousness that is required for the stabilization of the situation in the West Bank as well.
Okay, now, if we could talk about like some of the serious issues here. Obviously, one of them was the ideas that were being floated about forcible displacement. Now, Egypt stood firmly and publicly against attempts to forcibly displace the Palestinians from Gaza. How important is this position and was this position in shaping an international consensus to push for a ceasefire?
Of course, the whole world supported Egypt in relation to this issue because it's a war crime. This is not a joke. So, yes, Israel, by the way, Israel still hopes to kick as many Palestinians as it can, both from the West Bank and the Gaza. So this will not stop. But one of the important elements of the Trump plan is that it indicates in no uncertain terms that the Palestinians will remain in Gaza. And not only that, it also indicates that those who leave will be allowed to go back. So there is some clarity in relation to this issue. And as far as I'm concerned, this is a huge achievement for the Egyptian diplomacy in relation to making the issue of displacement become rather distant in as far as the possibility of its implementation is concerned.
Okay, my final question, sir, for you is, beyond the immediate calm, what must actually happen now to return the ceasefire into a foundation or a cornerstone for a lasting peace in Gaza, as well as the wider region, in addition to possibly reaching the two-state solution?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, because it is referenced in the Trump plan, but in a very weak way. It says that, after all these things take place and the Palestinian Authority is reformed and etc., who would judge whether the Palestinian Authority has been reformed enough or not to control Gaza? Will Israel make it simple? As a matter of fact, in 2012, the World Bank came out with a report saying that at the time there was a reform process in the Palestinian Authority and there was progress, and it said that the Palestinian Authority has done all what it can in order to advance the prospects of its economic situation, and the constraints put by Israel are now the problem in advancing further growth. Now, what happened at that time? At that time, Israel and the United States attacked the World Bank and criticized it very strongly for saying that. Now, this will be repeated again. So we will see what will happen. Now, in relation to negotiations, and this is one of the most serious problems with the Trump plan, is that it deals with this whole issue of the two-state solution and the establishment of a Palestinian state as a Palestinian aspiration, not a right. So it is not putting as its reference international law. It is saying that this is an aspiration of Palestinians, and the hope is that the environment will be conducive enough for this to be advanced. And I think that this is a very weak approach, and I hope as time passes by, the Arab and Islamic countries would be able to put pressure to bear in order for this to be rectified and move at a much faster pace and in a more serious manner.
Okay, Ambassador Hichem Youssef, thank you for your insights and for helping us understand what this fragile but vital moment means for the region. Egypt's diplomacy has once again shown that patience and persistence can carve a path towards peace, even through the ruins of war. Now we look at the other side of the ceasefire, Israel's mixed signals and Netanyahu's warnings that the war may not be over. The Times of Israel reports that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened to resume military operations if the ceasefire conditions are not met. In a televised address, he vowed that Hamas will be disarmed, the easy way or the hard way. I thank Donald Trump's diplomatic pressures and Israeli military strength for the deal. While Gazans begin returning north for the first time in months, Netanyahu reminded his audience that the war is not over. The IDF still holds over half the Strip, and Israel's far-right ministers continue to reject any form of Palestinian self-rule. At the same time, international diplomacy is moving forward. Italy announced the reopening of the EU Rafah monitoring mission, and Germany pledged €29 million in humanitarian aid ahead of a reconstruction conference to be co-hosted by Egypt. In Gaza, local officials thanked President Trump for ending the bloodshed and invited him to visit the Strip. Yet skepticism remains, with Israel's warnings of renewed force clashing against global calls for restraint and reconstruction. As one analyst told the Times of Israel, the ceasefire begins with hope, but Israel's words suggest it could end with more war. To examine the legal and humanitarian implications of this volatile ceasefire, we're joined by Professor Majid Boudin, an international law scholar. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Firstly, let's start off by asking now, Netanyahu says the ceasefire will be respected only if Hamas complies. There's always some sort of concessions or some sort of set of rules. How do you interpret the threat and how does this interfere with international law or go against it?
When we have an agreement, we have to obey and to this agreement and enforce it, execute it, and make it materialize. So we cannot condition Israel must with Netanyahu must comply with this commitment, with this agreement, and also Hamas must do it, and also all actors in this matter. So we cannot condition an acceptance. Acceptance is made, and so everybody must cooperate in good faith to fulfill their respective obligations. And this is international law, and there is no conditioning to do. So Netanyahu is playing also the game to continue to threaten, but this is not operational. Now there is a decision. The decision must be implemented and should be implemented, and this what will happen.
So from a legal standpoint, now does Israel's retention of more than half of Gaza's territory go against the principles or the core of international law, even though it's part of the ceasefire agreement, or at least the first phase of it?
Well, if Israel will keep half of Gaza, of course it will be against international law. But now, as a step to withdraw completely from Gaza, is in conformity with international law. So, well, it's just a procedure. So it's not a matter in itself. There is no decision that Israel will maintain its presence.
But they do want this. They do want to maintain what they have called a buffer zone. Is this legal?
No, it's illegal. They must get out now. There is an agreement, and they must get out completely from the totality of the Gaza Strip. And this is why we had now, following the negotiation of Sharm el-Sheikh between Hamas and Israel, under the facilitation of Egypt and Qatar and the US, in France, in Paris yesterday, there is the other side of it, which is complementary to it. Now they are starting to negotiate how to build up a peacekeeping force, which will replace the Israeli military forces.
But assuming that the Israelis decide that they're just going to do whatever they want, what sort of legal consequences may they face when it comes to retaining what they would call a buffer zone?
I don't think they will do it now because President Trump has made a decision here, and we can see the difference between the position of the American administration at the beginning of when they took office and they were supporting completely Netanyahu, and now the things have changed, and now President Trump himself, he was talking in his proposal of the settlement agreement. He was talking about the Palestinian state. So we are coming to the recognition of a Palestinian state by the United States. This is the logic of this agreement. It's incorporated in the agreement by itself. So, and then the other point, which is now discussed, and it's agreed on, and they are discussing the details. It's true that the devil is hidden in the details, but at least there is an agreement that the Palestinian state will cover the totality of the West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. So the borders before the 4th of June 1967. So this is a fact now, and nobody can change this. And
well, so if we could look towards the future, let's say in the near future this does happen and they come up with a lasting ceasefire agreement and steps towards a Palestinian statehood. Does this erase the legality of warrants against certain Israeli government ministers? Will there be legal accountability for their actions in the last 2 years, even if a deal is signed?
Yes, these are two separate questions, and it's right to put the question like that, but it's two separate issues. Why? Because whatever is the agreement, international law is providing for rules which are very clear. Whatever is the agreement, you cannot waive responsibility. You cannot waive accountability. Nobody can waive this. This is a different issue. There are crimes committed. It will be accountability. Nobody will skip out of this.
Well, Egypt is also preparing to co-host the major reconstruction conference alongside Germany. How crucial is Cairo's leadership in transforming this deal from just a military pause into the humanitarian recovery plan phase and hopefully the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip as well?
The position of, first of all, we have to remember when we are talking about reconstruction that the position of Egypt and of Jordan to not allow to kick out the Palestinian population from Gaza was a very important decision. And now we have seen that even President Trump is saying that no Palestinian will be forced to leave Gaza, which is a very important achievement for the Palestinians and for the right to keep their lands and to keep their possession of their lands. So that's very important. This leads now to the reconstruction, and Egypt is on the border of Gaza, and Gaza is the border of Egypt. So it's very important that Egypt participate in the reconstruction of Gaza, which is completely destroyed. And the Germans, now they are going in a positive way to participate in the reconstruction. And it's a way to recognize the Palestinian state, even though they have historical reasons to not recognize it for the time being, but they are coming on this road. And it's positive that the talks about reconstruction starts with between Egypt and Germany, and that Germany will participate financially and with other possibilities.
So with the first phase of the agreement in effect, we've seen Gazans walking home for the first time in months, which is obviously a rare relief, an image of rare relief, but it also brings up the heartbreak for these people who have lost their homes, lost loved ones, and so forth. Now, legally speaking, does the return of these civilians to the partially destroyed zones affect Israel's responsibility under the laws of occupation? And can these people, at some point in time, legally ask for reparations from the Israelis?
It's a very clear and straightforward answer on the basis of international law. Israel is responsible of the destructions of the lives, and destruction of the infrastructure, and Israel had the responsibility now to put back the situation as it was before. It's military aggression. So we have to make a comparison between what was the situation of Gaza before the military, the war crimes and the military, and the situation now, and how to reestablish the situation as it was. This gap, this is a calculation which is very, very clear to make, and this is the responsibility of Israel. Now the international community will participate in this efforts, but this is the responsibility of Israel. Israel must pay for all this. This is on the level of the of international law, of international responsibility of the Israeli state, which is the responsibility of the who may order the killings, and this is a separate responsibility, a separate reparation.
Yes, they're legally bound by it. So thank you so much, Professor Mejibuddin. Thank you for your expertise and for your insights on this complex situation right now. Tonight, Gaza stands between war and peace, but Egypt stands firm at the center, transforming diplomacy into deliverance. History will measure this moment not only by signatures on paper, but by whether children in Gaza can finally live without fear. I'm Morsi. Thank you for watching.